Thank you for having me today. I'm still kind of fairly excited by crowds. So yeah, I'm having a good time. We actually, myself and our creative director, Lewis, started having conversations about a vibe called tech maybe 4 or 5 years ago. We were working together at Freeze, across the art fair and the publication, setting up their creative studio, their first creative studio that was kind of working really closely with brands. And what we were finding is that brands were very keen on diversity in representation in their work. So they'd have like people of color in the campaigns, people with different body sizes in the campaigns, different kind of cultures in the campaigns, but they didn't really think about what the nuances of those cultures were or think about telling what the stories of the different cultures. That was irritating. We wanted to change that. But we didn't really get around to it until all the kind of upheaval around BLM. And Gucci was someone who we'd worked with before when we were together at Freeze. We found them to be kind of super open. If you had a great idea, they were kind of fairly willing to run with it, believe it or not. And we had a good idea, and so we went to them. And like in the introduction, the agency was kind of spoken about as looking at the intersection of black creativity, tech and culture. And it definitely did start that way. But as time's gone on, it's become really obvious to us that the kind of intersectionality of marginalized communities is actually what's really important. So absolutely, we still look at black culture, it's central to our work. But we also look at other marginalized communities and make sure that they're included. I think the last thing I just want to say in terms of who we are when we started and who we are now, it's about what the work is that's going to happen like when the party stops. So I think you probably all saw there's been a kind of like a feasting on blackness. There's been a kind of feasting on diversity. And then when something else happens, like the ball's dropped, and we want to kind of put something in place to make sure that that ball is never dropped, because there's so much work to do. It's not going to be done in my lifetime. I wanted to set, we wanted to set something up, to make sure that the good work continues. So I just want to take you quickly through the kind of different things that we do. Deep down, I'm a nerd, really into insights, really into data. Did a lot of work with the BBC where we used kind of insights to inform programming. So it's been like a part of my work for a long time. And so we do loads of insight work with clients now. We did just a big piece with Nike that was more kind of qualitative, like in-depth interviews, but I also love an Excel spreadsheet and some kind of quant stuff, so we do that too. We do diversity and inclusion work, so looking kind of the structures and processes within companies to make sure that diversity is included. Brand strategy might be my favorite, because to that point I was making about longevity, it feels like to me, when you get the kind of brand strategy right and diversity is at the core of everything that the brand's doing, that's likely to have the most impact long term. Our creative network, a lot of the point, well, there's two things with the creative network. The first is that we're really into telling like local stories globally. I feel like for a very, very long time, brands have kind of been like Paris is our biggest market and therefore we're going to shoot in Paris using Parisian talent. And when you think about it, it doesn't actually make that much sense. But I like to think that as a people, we're interested in other cultures. And if you look at things like Squid Game, like it's really clear that like other stories speak to people globally. And so that's something that we incorporate into our work. The other piece around our creative network is like financial sustainability for marginalized communities, right? So a lot of the time, especially when you're in the creative space, I'm sure all of you here have felt the brunt of this at some point, it can feel quite precarious. In terms of like where the next paycheck's coming from. And so we like to kind of bring as many people in as possible onto the projects that we're doing. And we work with a really diverse range of talent. So we don't use the same people again and again, because like our goal is to spread the wealth as much as possible. And then the final point, and I've, like all agencies say this, but I'll just have to say it too, is that like execution-wise, we're absolutely channel neutral. So like we just finished doing a book for the artist Sandra Perry. We do films. At the moment, I'm looking at a plant-based project. So like it is all just about, is the idea good? Where does it work best? And we take it from there. So, I'm going to take you through some work. And given that Gucci was the first client, I'm going to take you through that first project.
In many Ghanaian languages, there are no prominent gender distinctions. We are all they. And the body is often tied to the way we describe our emotions. It's really beautiful. Linguistically, ours are feeling bodies that do not have to be first defined by gender.
So what you're looking at here is a quote from an essay we commissioned as part of the campaign. And what it's talking about is the fact that in Ghanaian dialect, for most tribes, there's no words for he or she. So what Gucci came to us with was the launch of their new Jackie bag, which was meant to be gender neutral. To the point I was making earlier, the kind of key markets were like the obvious ones in Europe and America. They wanted us to look at doing campaigns in those markets with partners in those markets. We went a bit rogue and went to a platform in Ghana called Manju Journal and came up with a concept with them. Part of the reason for that was, like, I'm Ghanaian, I like Ghana, I thought it would be fun. Someone just woo. Good, whoever did that. And so I wanted to kind of do something in Ghana. And it turned out to be the first time that Gucci had ever shot in Africa, which is wild. But I think it's, like I said, it's an important thing about not focusing on obvious markets. But another thing about this essay, which became, I suppose, a thread in all the work that we did, is that we do our working out in public, right? So all of you work in the creative field, you know how much research goes into that final product, and everyone's up here talking about that today, but the audience never gets to see it. And I kind of think it's really important for them to understand fully what the ideas are behind the work that we're doing, especially because we're trying to tell new stories about, like, black culture. So there was a very long essay talking about why this matters, and that worked as part of the campaign. So this was all happening, like, at the peak of lockdown. So we couldn't travel to Ghana, which was upsetting. But also there was all sorts of protocols to follow, right? Because Gucci's a big international company. The last thing they needed was any kind of scandal around the fact that, like, everyone got COVID on their shoot. So all the models had to live together for a week in the run-up. But we also had to kind of get regular updates so they're all following guidelines. On one picture they sent us, it looked like a kind of COVID nightmare where they were all, like, topless and hugging for a particular shot. We got rid of that one. But what was really interesting was how that relationship was with us and Gucci. So they were they were strict about COVID, understandably, but also they've got super, super strict guidelines when it comes to styling, right? And they couldn't be on the set because no one could be on set. So that was quite kind of complicated to negotiate, kind of making sure that we were getting the shots and, like, all of the things that they needed to be in the shot were there. This is a good example of what wasn't allowed. So as well as the kind of styling, it turns out they had rules around how people sit. So the way that the legs are arranged here were not actually part of those guidelines. So we also had to scrap this photo, but I love it, which is why I wanted to show it today. What was really amazing for us, right, was that the response, firstly, like, in Ghana, like, everyone was going wild. Like, cousins were calling up and being, oh, Sha, like, you've done whatever, like, for Gucci, and it was amazing. But also, Manju Journal went on to do some really good work. This was, like, their first big brand piece. They've since done stuff with, like, Tommy Hilfiger and, like, Burberry, and it was a springboard for them to do that, right? And like I said, it's really important to us that people who've been standing around, like, empty-handed get their flowers, and, like, this was that moment for Manju Journal. So that very short snippet you just saw was from the project that we're doing with We Present, the creative arm of WeTransfer. And they are a very, very different type of client, right? Whereas Gucci is very much like they're the product, they need to sell it, like what's the idea? We Present act much more like facilitators. So this all began with a conversation that I had with at the time, was their CMO, Damien Bradfield, and the conversation was super loose. It's like, what are you interested in at the moment? What are you excited about? I was doing a lot of research at the time. I was super excited about black media and like how it's evolved from the beginning. And I was like, oh, I'd quite like to do a project looking at like what's happened since people didn't have any words, like written word, till now when there's all of these kind of new black-owned media emerging and like what that evolution has been. And they were like, yeah, cool, let's do that then. And so we are. That film was part of the work for the first part of that, which is looking at kind of the physical communications that we have with each other. And it was part of a bigger project that we did with Plantain Papers, which is a literary magazine based between here, LA, and New York. And for that project, we wanted to look at folklore. So there's like a really naughty spider called Anansi, who's like quite a big deal in black culture. Like everyone's heard the story in some form. But it's all really different stories, and it's evolved so much over the past, like, however many 100 years. So we spoke to a bunch of people, like, across the world to tell, like, their own stories about Anansi and, like, soundscapes and illustrations all around that. But what's been really nice is having, like, the time to evolve the idea. So obviously we're doing this bit, but we're going to have 3 other parts. And then you can kind of change things up as you learn, as you go along. And like not many kind of brands would give you the opportunity to do that. So it's been great. So yeah, what you're looking at here is some illustrations from Cheryl Tuesday. Because another thing we wanted to do is get to this root of the fact that the kind of tales of Anansi has been like appropriated. So the whole kind of Roger Rabbit cartoons that you see are actually based on Anansi. With Anansi, then it was Brer Rabbit, and it was Roger Rabbit. Kind of annoying, no one knows it. We kind of use the time to tell that story. And then there's kind of a whole bunch of photography around it as well, like talking to people across the world where Anansi is an important part of their world. Yeah, and there was soundscapes, portraits, films, interviews. It was super rounded, and as mentioned in the intro, we're now on a second piece of the project, which is working with Paul Mendes, which is very, very pleasing, and Boy Brother Friend and the illustrator Alex Main on black satire. So like updating black satire from the 20s with people like Jackie Ormez and seeing what it means to us today. And that, my friends, is it. Thank you.